welcome to AMC Movie Talk for movie fans. I'm your host, Ashley Mova, and this is the daily show where we give you all the latest news from the world of movies, plus insight into what it all means. Joining us as always is AMC Movie News Editor-in-Chief, John Campea.
Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the show, coming to you from the Stream.tv studios here in Hollywood, California. I'll be honest with you, I'm still recovering from the weekend from two things. Number one of the best regular season football games I've ever seen, Peyton Manning versus Tom Brady. Only jocks would get that. But also, I still cannot believe Family Guy killed Brian. Spoilers, but it's a TV show, who cares? They killed Brian. I can't believe my favorite character in the show.
That is such a depressing spoiler that I did not know, so thank you for ruining it. Also with us is AMC Movie News Production Manager, Dennis Zen.
I'm also recovering, but I'm recovering from the Pearl Jam concert I went to with Amy Rose on Saturday. We had a great time.
Get your fill of Eddie Vedder.
Yep.
Also here is writer-director Jon Schnepp.
Sing it with me. Give me the feeling.
Someone's going to make a meme out of that, by the way.
That's right. I didn't see Pearl Jam, but had a totally relaxing weekend and saw Coming to America, which I've seen before, but my girl didn't, so we watched that. How I Live Now and Beckett. So it was just a chill.
It's a nice trio.
Yeah.
The weekend box office has been catching fire. Get it? Catching fire. Anyway, the new Hunger Games movie set records this weekend, taking in over $161 million on its opening weekend, easily becoming the biggest November opening in history. The total also makes it the fourth biggest opening weekend in history, only behind The Avengers, Iron Man 3, and the final Harry Potter film. Catching Fire also became the largest opening weekend in history for a non-3D film, just barely beating out the most recent Batman film, The Dark Knight Rises. John, are you surprised by these numbers?
Frankly, yes. Am I surprised that they're big? No, but I believe I set the over-under number at 135 million for it, and I believe wrong. I believe I took the under. So I was off by quite a bit, as it turns out. But 161 million. Look, all these numbers are impressive. You know, biggest November opening, beating out the former title holder, which was Twilight. The fourth largest opening in history, only behind like mega huge films. Biggest 2D opening in history, that's great. But one of the numbers that nobody's talking about that I believe Lionsgate has to be absolutely thrilled with is this number, 59%. 59% of the total going audience that went to go see Hunger Games Catching Fire was female. And I think a lot of people thought that number would be higher. That means a little over 4 out of every 10 people who went to the theaters to watch Catching Fire was male. They have a much more diversified demographic now than they did for the first Hunger Games film. The appeal for this series is getting wider, and that bodes extremely well for the folks at Lionsgate and for the future of the Hunger Games franchise. They've got to be thrilled with this, and it's well-deserved. I mean, we did our spoiler-filled review this past weekend for Hunger Games Catching Fire. We all loved it. It's just an amazing film, well-deserved, great numbers, but yeah, I gotta admit, I'm a little surprised by how high they were, Dennis.
I'm not as surprised as you. I was expecting some big numbers, maybe not as big as these. I remember I mentioned on a previous episode, I talked about like how this franchise is different than something like Twilight, which was big as well, that the demographic for the male audience was much larger because more guys were willing to see it. A couple of our friends, you know, Chuck and Johnny, who you normally wouldn't think would go see it, they were interested in seeing it, and they couldn't see it because it was sold out.
Yeah.
So, I'm a little surprised, but not a lot.
Schnepp?
I'm not surprised. It was such a good film. I mean, it was already going to be a big hit, but I think word of mouth also just created a bigger buzz. Like, as people were like, hey, it's better than the first one. I think a lot of people, also having seen Hunger Games just on cable and on Netflix, I mean, it created a bigger buzz for people who didn't see it the first time. They were like, oh, I'm going to see the second one. So, I mean, that it got that big, I'm a little surprised at, but I'm happy to hear it. So
yeah, I didn't see 161 million coming. That's really awesome.
MGM is diving into the remake game a lot these days, with the recent Carrie remake and the upcoming Poltergeist remake on the way. And now it appears they're going to add the Patrick Swayze cult favorite Roadhouse to the list as well. XXX and the Fast and the Furious director Rob Cohen will direct the new film. Schnepp, are you looking forward to a new Roadhouse?
I certainly am. I love Roadhouse. I thought you would be bigger. I mean, there's like, it's so many quotes. It's such a fun silly, dumb, but awesome movie that hearing that Rob Cohen's taken over, I just don't know who they're going to cast for the Swayze role. It should be kind of someone that you might not expect. It shouldn't be The Rock. It should be someone. It should be someone who can like fight, but like someone who might not be exactly a giant dude. I mean, I'm all for it. It's been a long time. Maybe make sure it's funny. I hope that they keep the humor of Roadhouse. The tongue-in-cheek humor. So.
Yeah. Pain don't hurt.
Yeah.
And I used to screw guys like you in prison. I
know,
mean, it's some of the best lines ever. I think you nailed on something here. Look, in general, I love Roadhouse. Absolutely adore it. The absolute key, though, for remaking this film is going to completely be in the casting. Who do you get to play Dalton? Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the key. And you're right. It should be somebody a little bit more unassuming, but is at the same time a believable badass. Jackie Chan, no. But who is a believable badass at the same time. And I think that's going to be really key. Also, who do you cast in the Sam Elliott role? Because Sam Elliott, I think more than Elephant Man, I think that might be my favorite movie I've ever seen Sam. But when I think of Sam Elliott now, I think of the dude in Roadhouse. Like that's how quintessentially it is to me. And please, dear God, do you guys remember like back in 2006, they did a sequel to Roadhouse? Roadhouse 2.
Oh, I never saw
did,
it.
and it was intended to go theatrical wide, and it never did. But it's about Dalton's son is a cop and finds out Dalton's been shot. And now he goes to his uncle's bar to save his uncle's bar from drug runners and stuff like that. It's so bad, so terrible. But yeah, it's going to all be about who do you cast as Dalton. They nail that. It has a chance.
Yeah.
It has a chance. It's such a great story.
Yeah, I'm on the fence, and it really is on who they're going to cast. I think maybe like a Channing Tatum could work if you want to go the comedy route.
Yeah.
I think he can deliver some comedic lines. But then speaking of Rob Cohen, didn't he direct the last movie he directed was like Alex Cross?
Yes, he did, as a matter of fact.
So
yeah. One of the worst films I've ever seen.
So yeah, I'm gonna wait till I see a trailer before I make a decision on this one.
All right, folks. Well, listen, we've reached that part of the show called Buy and Sell. Here's how this works. In front of her, Ashley's got a few other items in the world of movie news. She's going to run them down, and then Schnepp, Dennis, and I are simply going to say whether we buy it or sell it. So, Ashley, what do we got?
Empire Magazine has just released a sneak peek at the cover of their January issue, which features the cast of the upcoming Transformers 4, including our first official look at the newly redesigned Optimus Prime. Dennis, buy or sell the new look of Optimus Prime?
I buy it, despite not liking the last two Michael Bay Transformers. I have liked the design for Optimus Prime. He's one of the characters that stand out for me. Like a lot of the Transformers in his movies, I can't really tell them apart, but he actually has a cool design other than the lips and maybe the flames on the side of the truck.
Right.
It's a cool design, and this is a revamped one. It's less boxy. It's a more rounded look, a sleeker look. So I like it.
Schnepp?
Yeah, I buy it. I think it looks great, and I like Transformers 3. So, and then they add Wahlberg. They got Dinobots. I'm there. I can't wait. So I'm excited about it. I think he looks badass. So.
Surprisingly, make it 3 out of 3. I'm going to buy this too. And like, look, I very notoriously did not like Transformers 2, did not like Transformers 3, loved the first Transformers movie, and I'm a huge Transformers nerd. But for whatever reason, despite being let down by the last couple ones, I have this completely inexplicable optimism about Transformers: Age of Extinction, about Transformers 4. And when I heard they were going to do some redesigns on the Transformers, I was afraid they were going to take real heavy departures. But when you look at this picture of Optimus Prime, you can tell that's Optimus Prime. I mean, there's a little more rounded, there's more curves to the designs, less hard edges, but otherwise it's still clearly Optimus Prime, so it's not that big of a departure. The big thing to me, though, he's holding the big-ass sword. You could have a picture of a panda bear, and if it's holding a big-ass sword, I'm completely on board, and that is a cool-looking big-ass sword. So, yeah, for me, it's a buy.
Moon and Source Code director Duncan Jones has reportedly left the upcoming film project Fleming, a biopic of the James Bond creator. Reports claim that Duncan's current project, Warcraft, will take too long for Duncan to have time for the Fleming project, and the studio wasn't willing for Jones to finish with the video game adaptation first. John, buy or sell Jones leaving Fleming?
Buy. Very enthusiastic. Now, while it sucks that he has to leave Fleming, because Fleming sounds like a very cool project. Especially, go online and you can read more about it, because it actually sounds like a very compelling project. But the thing for me is this. Warcraft for me, while I'm really looking forward to it, has a little bit in all of our mouths the taste of Halo. That they talked about and talked about and talked about, but there's this little itch in the back of your head thinking it's going to fall apart, it's never going to happen, and for good reason. Warcraft has been on the drawing board for years now. With Sam Raimi, it was going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's dead. Then Duncan Jones comes on, and even though they're saying they're talking to cast now, which we know already they're talking to Colin Farrell and others, that all sounds great, but until something tangible happens, there's still this itching doubt in the back of my mind that it'll really happen. But hearing that this thing is now so in stone and so tangibly ready to go that you got Duncan Jones walking off of other movies, to me it's a huge sigh of relief that maybe, just maybe, this thing is actually going to happen because I'm dying for a Warcraft movie. Dennis, how do you see it?
I buy it as well. I buy it because I think for a movie like this, and especially because I like Duncan Jones, and this is his first big budget movie, I don't think he needs the distraction of this other movie, which sounds like a really cool project, but I don't think he needs that distraction while he's working on the Warcraft movie. Like, hey, what do you think about this for Fleming? You know, because this Warcraft project is so big, I think he needs to just concentrate on that for now, and it's going to do, hopefully, wonders for his career.
Schnepp?
Yeah, I'd buy it as well. And I would just add that, you know, I like Duncan Jones in the science fiction world, science fiction fantasy. So to hear that he dropped out of this, I'm not crying about it, you know, because that means Warcraft's going to happen. So.
Yeah, and you know, one of the other reasons I'm really excited about Warcraft is this. I'm a big fan of the fantasy sword and sandal kind of stuff too. At the same time, I'm an old school Dungeons and Dragons player, so I mean I'm really into the fantasy stuff. And a lot of us thought that when Lord of the Rings was such a huge hit, a lot of people thought the floodgates were going to open for these, you know, Middle Earth type epic fantasy movies of sword and sorcery, right? But what happened was there was the opposite effect. Suddenly now these sword and sorcery films that were kind of in production got shelved because people were afraid of looking like Lord of the Rings ripoffs. I'm hoping that Warcraft, we've always been focusing on the video game aspect of Warcraft, that it could do wonders for the genre of video game movies, maybe being the first really good one. But I'm hoping on the other side that it kind of reopens the gates for fantasy sword and sorcery type of movies. So I got my fingers crossed for this on a number of levels. All right, what's next?
Disney has just announced the release dates for 2 of its upcoming fantasy films. A Jungle Book, being directed by Iron Man director Jon Favreau, will hit AMC theaters on October 9th, 2015. And Alice in Wonderland 2, being directed by Muppets director James Bobbin, will hit AMC theaters on May 6, 2016. Both Mia Wasikowska and Johnny Depp will reprise their roles from the first films. Schnepp, buy or sell A Jungle Book and Alice in Wonderland 2?
I'm going to sell it. I don't like the idea of a Jungle Book live-action movie, because Jungle Book was one of my favorite animated cartoons as a kid, the Disney animated Jungle Book. So, you know, Alice in Wonderland I thought was okay, so I'm not looking forward to a sequel for that either. So for that, I'm just going to sell both of them.
Dennis?
Despite not really caring for Alice in Wonderland, I buy it just because it made so much money, and you know, it is the movie business, and they're not going to turn down a chance to make even more money, so they're going to do that. And then Jungle Book, it has a name, and the animated movies have made money, so I see why they're doing that. Even though, yeah, I would prefer to stick in the animated realm versus the live action thing. They've
done a live action version of Jungle Book. It's called The Jungle Book. There was Jason Scott Lee, I think it was.
Oh, that's right.
With, from Princess Bride, the guy who played Wesley Princess Bride, Carl Ewells, I think is his name. Lena Headey was in it. Wow. So there was a version of it. I'm going to buy this. Number one, because I think it's a very cool story for Jungle Book side. And I kind of dig I'm curious to see Jon Favreau take a take on it. I would have sold Alice in Wonderland 2. I'm not a fan of the first one, directed by Tim Burton. Then, in general, I'm not a really big Tim Burton fan personally, but I like some of his films. The fact that Bobbin, though, is directing Alice in Wonderland 2, I love what he did with the Muppets. I really did. So I'm very curious and maybe even a little bit excited. Yeah, so for me, it's going to be a buy. Okay, folks, we've reached that part of the show called Mailbag. Listen, if you've got a topic or a question you would like us to address on the show, you can email us anytime at amcmovietalk@gmail.com. Now, every day we take a couple questions out of the mailbag, address them on the show. Ashley's got a few of them pulled out, so Ashley, what do we got?
Michael Malkowitz writes, "Hey AMC peeps, you guys and gals are awesome. My question is about Viggo Mortensen. Where did he go? Since The Lord of the Rings, he hasn't been in any more really big movies. So is it that the studios don't want to cast him, or is he just done with those movies? And if he isn't done, do you guys think we can see him in a Marvel or DC film? Thanks."
Viggo Mortensen is really one of these what the hell ever happened to kind of guys, because number one, he is a tremendous talent. This guy just flat out terrific actor on every level. He's got a great movie star look at the same time. He was in a couple of big hit films, especially we're talking about the Lord of the Rings trilogy, so he's in big blockbuster films. So and then he comes out and he does A History of Violence. I mean, he also had Hidalgo, whatever, but the key films he did was A History of Violence, which got a lot of critical raves and reviews, but it wasn't a huge blockbuster. Like I think domestically he made only about $30 million. Right? Then he did Eastern Promises, which is my favorite performance of his outside of Lord of the Rings. Terrific movie, I thought. Only made about $17 million domestically. Now, since then, he also did that one like post-apocalyptic type film, The Road. Right. Believe it only made about $8 million.
Well, that's a super depresso film.
Yeah,
so.
and then he did A Dangerous Method, which he was in with Michael Fassbender, which made somewhere around $5–6 million. So it's not like audiences had been rushing out to go see him, but he's an incredible talent. Now, he hasn't given up on acting. I know that he's actually been up for certain parts and at certain times. So I don't know what the problem is. Now, moving forward too, the number of roles that he kind of qualifies for is becoming more and more limited. Viggo's 55 years old now, which means, that doesn't mean he can't act anymore and he can't be awesome and great. It just means that the number of roles that are available to him are just not as many as he could. He can't play the 29-year-old love interest anymore, you know? And that's fine. But why not? I mean, why isn't he forefront on bigger films today? He's an incredible talent. So I don't really have an answer other than to say that I know that he's been up for certain parts and hasn't got them. This guy is just one of those, it's a shame because he should be a major, serious A-list superstar today. Anyway, Schnepp.
Well, I think he's choosing the roles that he wants to do. So I mean, he's got 2 films in like post-production now that he shot, but they're really smaller, independent films. They're not giant blockbusters.
But there are bigger ones he's gone out for and didn't get at the same time. So I mean, I just don't know why he's not getting these parts. These bigger ones.
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that either. I mean, I know that the 3 of the films that you mentioned were all directed by David Cronenberg, so he did, a succession of Cronenberg films, and then like did The Road. I think it's like the decisions to make these smaller, more independent films might, and also their lower and lower and lower box office accumulations have affected, what his status as a, movie star was 10 years ago with Lord of the Rings. So that has a direct effect, as to audience pull. I think a lot of audiences would still respond to his name if he was in a big action film or a big budget film or just a straight up important film, as opposed to smaller independent films. Not saying that those aren't important, but those just don't ring around,
Dennis?
Yeah, I think he's a fantastic actor. He has got a lot of charisma, definitely a leading man. I think it's a combination of both. He's probably not getting offered a lot of good roles, and he's probably choosing these. I mean, if you're doing David Cronenberg movies and a John Hillcoat movie, you're not looking at big blockbuster things. I'm sure there's probably some things that he got offered that were big blockbusters that were, maybe he just didn't like the project and he just turned them down.
He's very much in that whole artist community. He's like going to poetry readings. Remember, he was married to Exene. So I mean, he's a real straight up artist. So he's not gonna, if it doesn't ring for him, I think he's out.
But
so
if he was up for or were in a Marvel DC movie, I'd be all for it. Like maybe like an aged assassin or something like that.
Oh,
he'd be great.
He would be awesome and stuff. Like, when you see guys like Robert Redford and Sir Ben Kingsley and whatever, these guys taking, I think he would be great in them. But the question reminds me a lot of Julia Ormond. Remember Julia Ormond?
Sure.
For about a 2-year span, Julia Ormond was the biggest. I mean, as big as Julia Roberts or anything. She was like the biggest name going in Hollywood. She did like Legends of the Fall. She did First Night with Sean Connery and Richard Gere, and then she did Sabrina. Like she did these 3 films back to back to back that just made her like the Hollywood darling. and then disappeared for we start to see her these days in the last couple of years popping up in things again, but she was like the Hollywood darling and then just disappeared, and I never really knew why. I don't understand how she was the biggest thing one moment and completely gone the next. I hope the same doesn't happen to Viggo, because he's just too talented. Yeah. All right, what's next?
Daniel Matthews writes, "Hi everyone, love the show. I was wondering if I could get the answer to a question that has bugged me for years and never got a clear answer. And who better to ask than our Lord and Savior of movies, Mr. John Campea? Why did George Lucas start Star Wars with Episode 4?
You know what? It is surprising how many people, but understandable at the same time, how many people over the past 6 months have written and asked this question. Like, anyway, why or a version of it that basically revolves around Star Wars being Episode 4. Why did he start there? Did he have the Foresight, so he always knew the prequels were coming, blah, blah. The simple answer to this question is he didn't. George didn't start with Episode 4. When Star Wars came out back in 1977, that opening crawl did not say Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. It just said Star Wars. And I've got conflicting information. I believe that it wasn't until The Empire Strikes Back came out, and The Empire Strikes Back came out, and its scroll said Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. And then they went back and changed the scroll for the original. Some people say that there was the re-release in 1978 had the addition of Episode 4, A New Hope.
That's
yeah. So that
because I saw it.
Right.
Like with
so you saw it that way too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, but either way, he didn't start with Chapter 4. He started with Star Wars Chapter 1. Now, in ensuing years, there have been stories about George saying he always wrote it as a 9-chapter thing. That's not true. It may have been true that maybe he started to envision like a 10-chapter, a 10-part series. That might have been there as well. But when he made Star Wars, look, Lucas thought Star Wars was going to flop. He was pretty sure it was going to flop. He didn't when he first made the film think I've got a 10-film empire here. That wasn't until later. So no, George didn't start with Episode 4. All right, next question.
Mark O writes, "Hey AMC crew, love your show and hope you never end it. My question is about Rotten Tomatoes and critics in general. How come being a movie critic is a job? I mean, they are just normal people who like some movies and dislike others, just like me and you. So why should they be the ones who will determine how good a movie is by leaving a rating that we can see just by Googling a movie? Thanks and keep up the great work."
You know, this question comes up about film critics all the time. First of all, let's be really clear. I'm not a film critic. I'll do some movie reviews. And I think sometimes, so my mother understands what it is I do for a living, I'll sometimes use the phrase film critic, or that's what my mom said, but I'm not really a film critic. I have a different idea in my head about what a film critic is than some of the people. The real film critics are a lot of people with like journalism degrees and film history degrees and whatever, and can write a 6-page paper, an article about, and you know, dissecting a film. I love real film critics. I can read real film critics all day. And it's not necessarily people I have to agree with. Now, let's get back to the part of your question you're asking there, Mark, about aren't they just average people like you and me, you know, giving an opinion on a movie? Well, yes, sort of, but only in the same way that an actor is just a regular person standing in front of a camera reading lines they memorized. Or a plumber is just a regular guy who's going under your sink to turn a wrench. I mean, you can turn a wrench, right? The difference is, there are certain people who are trained and educated and have huge, vast experience and really understand film, and then they dissect it for us. Look, a lot of people, when they judge film critics, I think people judge film critics on the completely wrong scale. Most film fans judge a film critic based on whether or not they like the same movies you do. That's what they say. Oh, this guy likes all the movies I like. That means he's a good film critic. If he doesn't like movies I like, that means he's a bad film critic. That's a total nonsense definition or way of evaluating a film critic. Two of my favorite film critics of all time. Number one, Roger Ebert. I think I might have agreed with him less than half the time. But his skill and knowledge and history in the industry, when he would write his reviews and his insight, and he'd give opinions that I disagreed with, but then he would break down and analyze why he thought that, I came away enriched. Even though I didn't agree with his premise, and I liked the movie when he didn't, whatever. But because he was so skilled and gifted, I believe, at breaking down his whys, on everything and looking at it in a historical perspective as well. I would always come away from reading his stuff feeling a little bit smarter. Another guy that I maybe agree with a little bit more than half the time, Ty Burr from the Boston Globe. I read as many of his reviews as I can, and I only agree with him about half the time. But by reading it, and I like the ones I disagree with him the most, I walk away feeling I'm a little bit smarter than before I started reading. It's great, and too many of us like put on these visors, you know? It's kind of like, this is a problem I always say is wrong with the American political environment. It's like, people who are Republicans only watch Fox, people who are Democrats only watch MSNBC. It's like, no, I only listen to people who already say things I already agree with. That's how you make a nation of idiots. And I believe the same is true of movie. I believe it's in diversifying yourself. So, critics don't say whether or not a movie is good. They give their opinion about whether it's good and why they think it. And for me as a film fan, reading them is just overall a good way of enriching my film-going experience and my experience of being a film fan in general. And guys who are really good at it are rare. And guys who make you walk away knowing more about film than when you first started watching them are rare. And I think we need more of those guys, and we have a real tragic lack of them today. That's just the way I see it. Dennis, how do you see it?
While I do have a film degree, I do not have a journalism degree, and I don't really consider myself a film critic. I consider myself informed about movies and can give an informed opinion. And yeah, I think that he's I don't know, maybe giving less credit to these people than he should. It's not like some simple thing where it's like, hey, I'm just going to stand up and be a film critic, because like, if anybody could be a film critic, like, you would just have a lot of crappy opinions, you know? Like, I remember I did a review of Prince of Persia once, and one of the comments I got was, I can't believe you're talking about the camera angles in this movie. You have lost all credibility. And I was like, oh man, you would not want someone like that being a film critic.
Right.
Because they don't know what they're talking about. So that my opinion is, I would rather hear someone who has an informed opinion and who's studied it and knows the history and also the behind the scenes stuff.
And you don't have to agree with what it is they're saying.
Not at all.
It's just it's enriching even when you don't agree with them. Anyway, Schnepp.
Well, for me, it's like film criticism is someone like Jonathan Rosenbaum, who's like an incredible, in-depth film critique of the film and the industry and how films are made and genres. So that's someone that I'll read versus just a film critic who will, sometimes a lot of film reviews just simply repeat the plot and give away a lot of what I don't want to know when I'm seeing it. Well, I might see this movie. I'm not going to read your reviews because all you're doing is regurgitating the story and listing off the actors and then saying, I found this part to be cool. You know, that's what unfortunately, a lot of film reviews are that are out all across America now and across the world. They're very simplistic. So someone like Roger Ebert, sometimes I'd know I'd like the film if he hated it.
Right.
You know, it's like if Roger Ebert was like, I hated it because of this, and I was like, oh, he just listed off 6 things that I love.
Right.
Also, sometimes he would love a film for all the reasons that I love. And I agree with you. I think he was one of the best film critics around. I loved him and Siskel, too. Just their back and forth. And I'd always usually disagree with Siskel. He was so whiny. He's like, I didn't like it because of this. Well, definitely I'm seeing it now. If Siskel loves it, I'm going to hate it. You know, it's like one of those kind of things. So it's good to have people bounce off each other as well. I don't consider myself a film critic. I love films. I love fantasy, comic books, all that kind of stuff. And I'm super opinionated. So, I mean, like, if someone's going to come at me and tell me why they hate a movie that I love, I could, you know, argue with them or just talk with them. You know, like I was talking to you guys earlier, I was talking to someone who absolutely hated Star Trek Into Darkness. And just because of the way he was talking about it, I was like, wait, you're like a super Trekkie Star Trek nerd, right? You love the original series. I was like, yes, of course. The only one is Captain Kirk. William Shatner was like, aha! It was just like, you know, chink in the armor, like, now we can actually discuss this.
They're not coming from an unbiased opinion.
Correct.
They're coming from their hardcore fanboy opinion. And
coming into a film, hating a film. So it's one of those things.
When they're not coming in from objectively and looking at the different, you know, things. I mean, if someone who isn't a Trekkie said they didn't like Into Darkness and they told me why, they didn't like the plot, they didn't like this actor, then I wouldn't agree with them, but I would say, okay, you have some valid points and criticisms that, you know, while I don't agree with, I respect. And there is an exception to what I was talking about before about the informed film critic. Armand White is someone who has, he's got a deep film history, he's got a degree, he's like a, you know, got all this background. The reason why I don't respect his opinion is because he's a contrarian.
Yeah.
It's not because
he's a pure contrarian.
It's not because he doesn't have the knowledge. It's he takes that knowledge and he twists it and turns it. And if you ever read any of his movie reviews, he talks about movies and he talks to them from a different perspective than what the movie's actually about. He takes either a political or social angle that's not even present in the movie. And so what ends up happening is he'll take these movies that are just like terrible and talk about them like these masterpieces, like a movie like Lottery Ticket,
right?
Or Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. He would talk about how, you know, operatic it was and stuff like that. So someone like that is like, for me, the exception to the rule, where they're not using their knowledge for good.
I think the word for that is hipster. When you're talking about a
well,
hipster.
the thing with a guy like Armand White, though, is I've stopped even worrying about Armand White because I don't believe he believes the things he's saying. I think you're right. He's a contrarian. Yeah. So I don't even believe he thinks. I mean, he gave Toy Story 3 a rotten review.
All the Pixar movies he hates.
And all the terrible. But I think I just came to the belief that, you know what, even he doesn't believe what he's writing. I believe he's just doing it to be contrarian. But I wanted to bring up one other thing really here quick. Since we got a Rotten Tomatoes thing up here and you were asked about Rotten Tomatoes, and this is almost a little bit of a side note, but get a lot of people often ask me, you know, Rotten Tomatoes doesn't know what they're talking about, or Rotten Tomatoes is always right. Just to be clear here, Rotten Tomatoes doesn't do movie reviews. Rotten Tomatoes doesn't give any movie a score. What Rotten Tomatoes does, and this is why I find them to be a really valuable service to film fans, is what they do is they just go out and see all the film critics, like newspaper guys, online guys, TV guys, whatever they take all the film critics, hundreds of them, say how many of them gave the movie a positive review, how many of them gave it a negative review, and they just tell us what the score is. They don't make up a score, they just tell us what the score is, that 83% of the critics like this, or, you know, only 15% of the critics like this. That's what Rotten Tomatoes does. They don't give something a score. So I just thought I'd mention that really quick.
I wanted to add one little thing about the Star Trek conversation I had with this guy is the points that he brought up were totally valid. They weren't like, oh, you're wrong because you're a Trekkie. I could see why a Trekkie would find it disrespectful because it was like, there's 24 years of canon and then they just throw it away. And I was like, but that's why I liked it. So it's simply, it was just a simple opinion of like, especially that Spock-Kirk death scene where Spock's like, Khan! That's what I think really rubbed Trekkies wrong.
I loved it.
I loved it because it was just,
they
were like,
it.
I can't believe they even used the same dialogue. It's like, I know, wasn't that awesome? They're like, no! They're like, it really is like this polar opposite thing, and it really just comes from just how you perceive it. You know, whether you're cool with reinterpreting something or not, you know. So.
Well, folks, we have gone overtime. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, I want to thank the guy sitting at the table with me, sitting to my immediate right, the production manager of AMC Movie News, Mr. Dennis Zen. Dennis, where can people find you online?
You guys can find me on Twitter at ThinkHero and on YouTube, ThinkHero Pro.
And beside him, he's writer, director, AMC film commentator, Mr. Jon Schnepp. Schnepp, where can people find you?
You can find me at Twitter, clearing my throat, ready to sing some more Eddie Vedder here. Twitter and Instagram at Jon Schnepp. And check out my sword and sorcery fantasy Kickstarter, Unicron the Unicorn Barbarian.
And sitting over there, of course, our lovely host today, Miss Ashley Mova. Ashley, where can people find you?
You guys can find me on Twitter at Ashley Mova.
And you can find me on the various social media channels at John Campia. Hey, folks, listen, if you haven't done so already, take a second and click on the subscribe button. Become a subscriber to our AMC Theaters YouTube channel. Keep you up to date on everything going on in the world of movie news and, of course, our daily AMC Movie Talk show and our weekend AMC Mailbag show. If you want an audio-only version of this episode, look in the description of this video and you'll find links to our iTunes and our Stitcher radio so you can listen to us on the way to work. Thanks a lot for joining us, guys. Once again, my name is John Campia for AMC Movie News, and until tomorrow, bye-bye.
If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to AMC Movie News on YouTube. It's free and a great way to stay updated with all the latest movie news and check out our daily show, AMC Movie Talk. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Twitter to stay in the loop for our special prizes, giveaways, and contests.